middle of the screen.
Larry got it. Okay, we're good. We're good to go.
All right, and as ever, if anyone has anything to say, by all means, speak up. This presentation was given to the Cleveland History Center, the Western Reserve Historical Society, 2 months ago in honor of their recognition of the what's called Sisters Religious, who are the sisters, they're not nuns, at the St. Adelbert School on East 83rd Street, which is K through 8, 99.9% Black and Catholic. And it's the only one of its kind in the city, I think. So they have all religious education integrated into their secular education. My son happens to be the art teacher at that school. So he has learned very proficiently and in depth the Catholic religion because every art project revolves around something Catholic. So it's been a real challenge for him, nice little Jewish boy, to pick up on the details of one of our compatriot religions. So this presentation was put together to honor these sisters and several others, but the background is the photographs themselves, the majority of which were taken in 1995 in reference to the Cleveland Bicentennial, put a book out. And my contribution to the book was to photograph 65 religious figures throughout Cleveland who represents every one of the known 65 different groups. So I spent several months tracking these people down, contacting them, and then going out in situ to photograph them where they were in practice. And there are many here, which you'll see, which are just gorgeous portraits. And there are many more with some interesting stories, which I will tell you. So here is a conversation with me on religious Cleveland. And the presentation was called The Face of Religion. So, what is the first building constructed by any ethnic or cultural group when they inhabit a new environment?
Church, synagogue.
You've got an answer for you, Irina.
That's again.
Hospital.
Cemetery.
A bakery.
A bakery.
Okay.
25 years ago, there were over 500 different bakeries in Cleveland, which represented different neighborhoods, cultures, religious classes, attitudes, perspectives, and the second building constructed by an ethnic group which inhabited a new environment would be what?
Cemetery. No, it's church.
Built in 1838 and still used. Still standing, oldest standing utilized church in Cleveland. So the moral is, obviously the message is clear, food for the body is as important as food for the soul. And what I really wanted to do was to write it for food for the body was more important than food for the soul, which would have represented my particular feelings on religion in general, but I was getting paid by somebody else, so I stayed with the program. So If you seek immortality of the soul, talk to a clergyman. If you seek immortality here on earth, call your local photographer. And this has always been a primal message that I have given out for 50 years of my career, that my work is literally immortal. And if you go talk to someone with a religious background, it's all for the here and the now, doesn't count. It's what comes in the future. But the work of a photographer documents, preserves. I always told my clients that I created family heirlooms that would be passed down from generation to generation and literally give them immortality. So while we're on the subject, what's the difference between color photography and black and white?
Black and white is timeless.
Okay, good. And why? Why is it timeless?
Plus, usually you can distinguish things with color as to what year it was, or what's.
Well, primarily black and white deals with emotion, and color deals with fact. So color is familiar. It gives you information. But when you want to deal with something that's highly emotional, black and white requires you to analyze the image intellectually and respond to it emotionally, because there's nothing on that page but a graphic. It goes black to white with all the little detail, all the little grays in between. So color, it's nice and pretty. Black and white, it's very intense. And I was speaking to an audience at the Historical Society that was 90% African American. There were a handful of white people there who'd heard about it, but Regina Williams, who was responsible for promoting me, had sold this as primarily as a presentation to the Black community on religion in Cleveland, which I will get to in detail. So keep your emotional responses in mind as we peruse these black and white portraits of local religious leaders and participants. Cleveland is one of the most religiously and ethnically diverse cities in the United States. Cleveland is not a melting pot, it is a tossed salad. Nobody blends together. You can drive down the street and see one neighborhood after another just by crossing the street. Statistically speaking, now these are mostly statistics that are about 30 years old, because no one has put together new statistics, at least that I could find, because I looked for them for days. And the numbers are approximate, of course. There are 1,040 Christian-based churches in the Cleveland metro area, dozens of other non-formal Christian denominations, 50 Jewish synagogues, 8 mosques and religious centers, an unknown number of storefront, home, or pop-up churches of independent, odd, interesting, and unusual denominations. We are a massive conglomeration of cultures. According to the Cleveland Encyclopedia, which was published in 1996 and randomly updated with sporadic articles in the ensuing decades, there are over 75 established religious organizations in Cleveland, and I photographed representations of most of them, all the ones I could find. I did not photograph in any mosques or Islamic organizations because they wouldn't let me in. They didn't return phone calls, and they weren't interested. There was one photographer, however, who had a connection which got into one mosque, took 3 pictures, and was asked to leave. Although a rough breakdown of former religious establishments in Cleveland would include, and you can look at these, 320 Baptist, Congregationalist, Methodist or Presbyterian Church, Catholic, Lutheran, Pentecostal, Jewish, non-denominational, Church of God, Eastern Orthodox, Apostolic, Jehovah's Witnesses, Assembly of God, which is not the same as Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Scientists, African Methodist, Episcopal AME and AME Zion, Islamic Seven Holiness. And I noticed just now that the hell they're called, the guys that go door to door.
Mormons?
No, from Utah, the
Mormon.
Mormons.
Mormons, yes.
Mormons.
There's 2 Mormon churches in Cleveland,
Hmm.
which aren't even on here. Fascinating. I've gone through this 100 times. It just occurred to me. Also, including all of those churches, there are over 24 who celebrate exclusively in American Sign Language, Spanish, German, Croatian, Hungarian, Slovenian, Ukrainian, Greek, Russian, blah, 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 blah.
Wow.
So along with English-speaking churches in the thousands, over the thousands, there are all these individual churches that speak in their own definitive languages. There are over 613,000 Catholics in the Cleveland Diocese, which is 1/3 of the entire population of Cuyahoga County. And this represents 45% of the population of Cuyahoga County. There are 185 parishes, 108 church schools, pastoral centers, 1 mission office, and of course, Tremont St. Augustine, which is the only church service signed for the deaf in the entire Cleveland metropolitan area. Colleen's cousin was the priest there for about 40 years. He was at our wedding. He married us. So what's the complexion? And there's a play on that word of Cleveland's religious leaders. So this ensuing program are pictures of what these people look like who represent these various different religions. And let's start with Catholics because there are so many of them. Do you all recall Anthony Pilla,
Sure.
who was the bishop here for 25 years? And he was the first Cleveland bishop born in Cleveland and the first Italian. And I was at a wedding that he officiated at, which was very rare.
Herb Asherman's giving a talk.
He never officiated at anything. And sitting across the table was his mother. And I said, Mrs. Pilla, your boy Anthony, he's a nice boy. He does good things. And she looks at me and she goes, you Jew, how you know Italian? And that was the story. So that's why I put him first, because he really was a very nice, very sweet, very approachable guy. This was the priest at St. Peter's, which is 17th and Superior, and it was declassified as a church, and there was thousands of people who signed a petition to bring it back. And although it still to this day has no furniture in it, they reappointed a priest and reopened it. So wherever I was, I would try to find something that was befitting of the environment. This is St. Malachi's Hospice on the near west side, West 25th Street. So I would try to find something that both spoke to the religion and spoke to the person as well. Physically speaking to people. This was at a church school in Parma. I don't remember their names. He was the only priest in a Black church. They had searched for years before they found a priest to come into a Black Catholic church and lead them, because there were no Black Catholic priests who were Black. This is the church that is behind the parking lot at the West Side Market, that big black thing in the other. I go in there, all these were done in the middle of winter. And very nice guy, Spanish, speaks Spanish, the liturgy was in Spanish. And we photographed for a while, and I went out to him and I came back in and I said, my car's frozen. I can't get in the car. You know, and you try with the electronic keys, you can't heat them up and stick them in. And if the beeper doesn't work, it doesn't work. And he says, well, you know, maybe you'll keep trying, maybe something will happen. And I was talking to him and I brushed up against the icon that's behind the painting on the wall. And then I went back out and tried once more, and all of a sudden the car opens up. So I came back in and I said, this is really coincidental that I would touch the icon and the car would open. And he looked at me and smiled and said, yes, my son, you've just had a miracle. Which we accepted as such so we could pack up and get to the next job. This is a church on Scranton around West 25th Street. And it was built in the 1850s. And at that time, if you're aware of your Cleveland history, this was just a backwater town on the lake. So that when you needed sculpture, as in Lakeview Cemetery, you sent an emissary over to Italy, and he hires 100 sculptors who moved their entire family to Cleveland and who lived literally at the foot of Mayfield Cemetery, not Mayfield, Lakeview. And you have an environment like Little Italy, and it's lasted over 170 years. This is a church on the west side that was built by Germans, and they had imported, I don't know, a half a dozen or a dozen wood carvers, German craftsmen. The church is filled with over 150 wooden sculptures of icons, of saints, of happenings, of whatever. And it is one of the most beautiful and the most fascinating in all of Cleveland. So I'm getting this history lesson as I'm photographing the players. This church is at the foot of Buckeye around 93rd, huge. At the time, 30 years ago, when I took this, it was no, it wasn't Episcopalian, it was Protestant, it was something. And the priest was also the caretaker of the church because the population had disseminated throughout the city. And I wanted to give an idea of the grandeur of just the size and the scope and the scale of this incredible art, which is housed in a one-room museum. Daniel Begin's brother was an activist in Vietnam, also a priest, and he was arrested, thrown in jail, and became one of the national figures in the protest movement against the Vietnamese War. I forgot his name, Robert, I think it was. Dan Begin said to me, my brother wants to save the world. I want to save it one person at a time. And that struck me, as it has for the last 30 years. And in his kitchen, he had written himself, O King of stars, whether my house be dark or bright, never shall it be closed against anyone, lest Christ close his house against me. And lest Christ, okay, take the Christ out of it, put in God, put in whatever you believe. But this is, in my opinion, the purest definition of what religion should be. Never shall it be closed against anyone, lest the higher power close his house against me. And I was struck by it, and I remembered it, and I have it on my desktop, little, icon of him. And it's one of the most memorable experiences that I ever had in this whole project, talking to someone who was just interested in saving the world one person at a time.
Mhm.
Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox. This is not Jewish, this is Christian. Some of the churches were very, very simple because people would come in and stand for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. Others, this is a monk on a little monastery on Euclid Avenue. That most of the time it was lit by, I had to bring lighting in, but if there wasn't any daylight, it was lit by candles. And the monks wandered around in their monk robes, which I tried to get off of one of them. He wouldn't give it to me. And they lived the solitary life of dedication and prayer. Saint Bernat, someplace like that, down on Snow Road, gigantic church. They house over 2,000 people in their auditorium, which they have. The day that I took this, there was a pierogi festival going on. So there were probably 3,000 or 4,000 people trying to eat. And he was just very open and very willing and gracious with his time and with his effort, gave us lots of pierogies to take home. And as we left, he said, "Love thy neighbor." Again, living the spirit and the spirituality that he teaches. This is a Russian Orthodox church, Byzantine, on the west side. And he put on, this is their altar, and he put on his finest robes for me and posed. And afterwards, he gave me a mother of pearl shell, a huge one. And he said, "Here, this is from your homeland." And I looked at it and said, "Czechoslovakia?" And he didn't get the joke. So I just said, "Thank you very much." And I took it and put it in the house. But he was trying to identify me being Jewish with, obviously, Israel. AME, Zion, and Baptist. I sort of lumped all the Black churches together because, Bo, you have to stop. I don't know the difference between them. And the only notes that I kept were a random list of the preachers, and not specifically their own flavor of religion. So they have huge, sweeping, almost Gothic churches. This one, I believe, is at East 40th, right off Chester. This guy is Reverend Perkins, pastor, who is one of the most dynamic in the city. And I sat through a 3-hour ceremony of his, which was like a rock show. And it had everything from live music and a band to singers and performers and comedians and lots of religion. So it was a real intro for me, the nice Jewish guy from Shaker Heights, down to experience what somebody else has experiences on a first-hand basis, which is one of the most marvelous things about this whole project, is that I got to meet so many people in such diverse environment. Very quiet people, men, very conscious men, very low key, low ego, very easy, friendly people who live their religion, who breathe their religion, and didn't try to sell their religion. That's what I got out of many of these ministers. Also women. And at the time, this is the 90s, women were just beginning to really take a foothold into the religious community. Up to that point, they were very marginal. And of course, when they prayed, and we were there, my assistant and I, we prayed with them. And as I'm packing up to leave, she said, "Come over here," and gives me a 5-minute hug. You know, like, go, glory of God, go forth, spread the word, be part of the word, live the word. He was the director of one major umbrella organization, and I don't remember what his name is, nor do I remember the organization, but this was his office. So it was the church above the world. Again, nice guy. Reverend Otis Moss, who marched with King, was one of my first portraits in this community, and he and I have remained friends for 40 years because I took his portrait long before the project started. He actually called me up to come in and take his portrait. So this goes back probably 40 years. We've all gotten a little older. That was the original portrait. And it hangs up and it says "Man of God" over it. And when I walked into his church about 5 years later, there were drawings and there were paintings and there were mosaics. They had copied this picture probably 100 times in various different kinds of art, spread it throughout the church. Protestant, Presbyterian, Episcopal, Catholic Light. So we just lumped them all into one organization. Whoa. This is the Fairmont Presbyterian. Holy, holy, holy is one of the opening words of a very important Jewish prayer. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And I walked in and he and I were talking and I looked up and I said, "Why is there a Jewish star on your pulpit?" And he says, "Well, I change it 2 or 3 times a year, but the point of the Jewish star is to remind the congregation where their origin was or is." And I thought that was very telling. I thought that was a remarkable compliment to unity throughout the different religious groups in Cleveland, and it certainly impressed me. Across the street is the St. Paul's Episcopal, which was literally a Catholic church, so I photographed the priest, I guess he is, with a Gothic persona, showing him under as one small man under the huge arch of religion that they had built. And that people come in, and they are the people who come into the church are literally dominated by the church because it's so big and so imposing. So I tried to give it some feeling of perspective, not identity and not warmth, because it's not a warm place, but just perspective as to how big man is as opposed to, or how small man is in relation to how big religion is. This is the Episcopal Diocese Church down on East 36th, I believe. And it's a really magnificent European environment. A little church out on the west side on Detroit, and one of the first women who was a full minister and director of a congregation. So again, using the environment to make a comment about the person. And here she is looking at Jesus on high, reflecting on what that message is with the intention of giving it to her community. I like this one particularly because he was just very peaceful, just a very quiet portrait. A lot of these guys are holy rollers, both in personality and as well as from the pulpit. But he was just, again, most of them are. egoless and desirous of service in a subservient manner. Although there were very, very, very many that I've met as a wedding photographer whose ego would blow the top off any church in the city. So there are all kinds of people out there, but the ones I photographed were primarily content and quiet and templative and dedicated to their mission. This is the church at Tremont with that huge glass window. And again, it's putting her in perspective to the religion that is built around her and that she now serves. Priest. Hayward, his name was. This was at the big church at University Circle. On the Case campus, not the Church of the Holy Oil Can, that's different.
The Church of the Covenant, I think.
Church of the Covenant, exactly.
Yeah.
Church of the
Is it
Covenant.
across from Severance Hall?
Next to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Across from Severance Hall is the Mather Chapel,
Oh,
which is only used by reserved people. So I wanted a very nice, he was just very congenial, and I just wanted a very congenial portrait of him. That didn't say much about his religion, but just spoke to his importance as a minister. Oops. Again, one of these, this is Thomas Wolcott, and I cannot remember who he was, Diocese of Cleveland, which diocese, the Catholic, the Episcopal, the Baptist, I just don't remember. But that was at his office. And you can tell the organized chaos around him, where his thoughts really are, as opposed to walking into some place that's just virtually antiseptic. So then we have Baha'i, Congregationalist, Salvation Army, Lutheran, Methodist, Evangelical, Sisters of Notre Dame, Jesuit, Unitarian Universalist, Church of the Latter-day Saints. Oh, there they are, Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, Lebanese Christian and Buddhist. So I'm trying to cover one of everybody. We have one major Buddhist temple on the west side, and he is then for 40 years the prime priest who leads the meditations and the teachings. This is the Unitarian Universalist Church on Shaker Boulevard at Belvoir. Very, very Spartan, very severe, very clean, as is its New England roots. I'm not sure where he was from, but I like the stained glass. She was a Congregationalist. She was, I just don't remember. There was so long ago, and unfortunately, East Side something Methodist, I think. Salvation Army. Congregationalists again. This is the temple, the church at Avalon and Van Aken, husband and wife combination. Very, very clean, very sparse, very New Englandish. When I was at prep school in Massachusetts, we had to attend some sort of religious environment every week. And if you didn't want to join the Jewish kids who got bused 4 towns away and sat through an Orthodox service every week, we would go to the local Congregationalist church and sit in the back for an hour and get our dose of religion, and then go back and play soccer. The Mormons, Latter-day Saints, strictly male hierarchy. They spent an hour inviting me into the religion, sort of very subtly. but then posed for it and told me the difference between the Latter-day Saints and the Mormons, and they discussed polygamy in detail. Not that I was interested, but it was just fascinating to hear what their sales pitch was, what direction it came in. He is Baha'i, which is primarily an Iranian religion, but the home church for the Baha'i is in Tel Aviv. It's on a mountaintop, and you approach it through 2 or 3 dozen levels of gardens that are absolutely magnificent. At the time, he was the director of John Carroll, and there's a sculpture of John Carroll, the priest, from whom the school was named. And at the time, Sister Jean was the president of Notre Dame College of Ohio. Too bad she's not there. Church would be in much better shape. And all of these people were very, very gracious in giving me their time and their efforts and the chance to work with them. So spiritual, but not church. For example, this is the homeless center or the men's center on the corner of the southwest corner of East 55th and Carnegie. And this was the director at the time. You see the computers. It was a job training. They have bunks for these people. They lived on campus. They were required to dress up every day, and they were required to attend a daily, very heavy church service. And I asked him why. And he said, well, we don't take a dime from the government, so we can teach them any way we want. And the way that they chose to teach was, you want to learn how to read and write, that's fine. Learn how to learn Jesus as well. And that's their pitch. So they're turning out good citizens and good Christian citizens. West Side Ecumenical Council, West Side Lutheran Church, fabulous guy. Now, he is totally unique in the United States. There's only one of him in one organization. He was the president of the National Association of Church Ushers. And I had never heard of a National Association of Church Ushers until I drove by on Larchmere, saw the sign, knocked on the door, and he opened it and said, "Are you an usher?" I said, "No, I'm an asher." And told him who I was and what I was doing, and he said, "Sure, I'd love to have you take my picture." So right here in Cleveland, we have a national organization of church ushers. He was some fringe element. He didn't have a church. He taught through music, and everything spiritual was said musically or poetically. Reverend Albert Wagner, Cleveland's most famous poet, preacher, and painter. His house was on 125th and Euclid. It was a museum. It had over 1,000 paintings in it. He had 12 wives, 26 children, 49 grandchildren, and supported himself in this house through contributions and donations that everybody made. I got to photograph him for the artist project, which I'm glad I did, because this portrait hangs in the Historical Society in the room with all his paintings that they dedicated to him. So in terms of the word character, he stands out in my experience as the character that I've ever worked with, but he was absolutely fabulous. And again, very, very gracious. Sam Asherman, page 10, is a Dudist priest. If you've ever heard of the Dude, you've all heard of the Dude? Yes? Has anyone heard of the Dude? The Great Lebowski was the Dude. And there is an official church ministry set up for the dudism that he initiated, and that anyone can join for the price of $25. Sam, I don't think can do marriages, but he is available to preside at any other religious organization. So, the Decalcid Carmelite Sisters, and you can read this. They pray 6 times a day, barefooted, and the essence of their life is the living presence of God in imitation of their most pure mother and the prophet Elijah. The motto is, with zeal I have been zealous for the Lord God of hosts. Up until 15 years ago, they were, what's the word, where they were a cloister. And
Yeah,
it was only then that they relaxed themselves enough to not only become social, but to become part of the community. Now, she's not praying barefoot, which she should have been. So she was just posing for me to show me what they look like. She didn't want to take her shoes off because that got into religion. This is the monastery at the corner of Fairmount and Lee Road with the big curved wall, which you drive by all the time. They have since closed it, sold it, because when I photographed them, there were 12 nuns left. And by the time 2 years came ago, they had sold the property, and the 5 remaining nuns had moved across the street into a house of their own. So I tried to capture each one with a different thought and a different feeling. And I even went to the old nun's home to photograph the last one who lived in the habit. And she was known for having said the rosary several 100,000 times in her life. The sisters religious. These are the Black sisters. Sisters of Our Lady of Kilimanjaro and the Evangelizing Sisters of Mary, two distinct and different groups. The Sisters of Kilimanjaro are called. They're not solicited. So you can read this about what their philosophy is. To make her his instrument to transform the world and to incarnate the gospel value in a constantly changing world. So there were 2 of them who came from Kilimanjaro. And I spent a day there doing portraits, each one of them. I brought the lilies, knowing that the lily is a symbol of Christ. They were all very impressed. And then the Evangelizing Sisters of Mary have their own convent here in Cleveland, and the 3 of them worked at the school. They are missionaries. Anyone called can be 25 and above, depending on her qualifications. And if she is a graduate, it means the years have gone, I can't read it because she was a student. The years have gone higher. They'll take a pay. They hire an older person to join them. They're tiny. They're little tiny people. So, Jewish Cleveland. First Jewish settlers arrived in 1839 from someplace near Bavaria or something like that. And they were given a letter of good luck and good health and good happiness, which is in the original copy of which is at the Western Reserve Historical Society. It's got a name for it, which I don't remember. So we have Hasidic and Chabad down the road from me. On the left is the picture of the Rebbe, who died in 1996, I think, and is still venerated as the perhaps Messiah, and the thought is that he still may return to earth at some point. Orthodox, in the books, every Orthodox home that I've ever been in is covered with the tracts, the Talmud, and all the other Jewish writings. Conservative, Park Synagogue, Eisenberg brother, father and son, Temple Israel near Tamid up on Lander. Only father-son combination, although Fred is now retired. He was at my wedding too. In the country. I will tell you an aside. As I said, Colleen's cousin, was a Catholic priest. And there is such a thing as pre-Cana in the Catholic Church, where when you are getting married, you have to go down and be vetted by the priest. And you have to be vetted in terms of your education, your commitment to Christ, et cetera, et cetera. So Colleen tells me that she wants me to meet her cousin. So we go down to the church, and he's very kind and very generous and very talkative. We're there for an hour or two. And I specifically mentioned to him that there would be no mention of any specific deities at our wedding. He was going to co-officiate. Eisenberg was the other priest, other rabbi who ran the service. And he agreed to that. It was no problem. And then at our wedding, the Irish bagpiper plays When Irish Eyes Are Shining, and Colleen comes down the aisle and I'm standing up under the huppah. And Eisenberg starts to welcome. And there are 75 Jews on one side of the aisle and 75 Catholics on the other side of the aisle. And Eisenberg turns to the Jews and welcome. And as he turns to the Catholic, the bell went off in the back of my head that said, this guy is a loose cannon. You have no idea what's going to come out of his mouth. And he walked over to the Catholic side of we were at the Ritz, so there were all the chairs. And he looks down and he says, you don't know this, but I was raised by a Irish Catholic nanny when I grew up in Boston, and proceeded for the next 10 minutes. Colleen and I are standing there. The priest is standing and proceeded for the next 10 minutes to extol the virtues of Christianity and Christ to the audience, at which point the Jews are going, what the fuck is that? And the Catholics are going, aye, for a Jew man, he's not so bad after all. So that was my major experience with this particular rabbi. And it was unforgettable. The Jews just cracked that. Reform and conservative. There's one West Side temple. Of all the 85,000 Jews in Cleveland, there's one temple on the west side of the city. Roberts, since retired and has become a professional comedian. Not that he wasn't when he was a rabbi, but we have our LGBTQ officials. Fairmount
Sarah
Sun,
Sager.
Fairmount Temple, Sarah Sager, very, very famous. Fairmount and Silvers are now going to join because each of them in the heyday had over 3,000 family members, and now they don't have 2,000 between the two. So they're going to combine efforts. Dan Silver, who was the son of Abba Hillel Silver, who founded Tifereth Israel, Silver's Temple. I photographed him years before and in his office, and it was just, the painting became so indicative of what this guy's mind was like, just constantly percolating. Reconstructionists. I looked it up, I studied it, I'm really not quite sure what they do. And I went into the synagogue to Silver's one year and set a camera up, a wide angle lens, to shoot images inside the temple, which had never been done before and hasn't been done since, because now this is part of Case Reserve and it's a musical center as opposed to a religious center. One final thought, and it goes back to Begum. If there's any message of all religions, it's never shall the door be closed against anyone. And the essence of a real religious person is to keep that door open, regardless of who it is or for what reason. And that's the way of peace. My half-brother in Jerusalem is a rabbi. His daughter is in naval security. His son is an elite commando who goes into Gaza every afternoon for the last 2 months. And he, in many discussions, told me that basically countries make war, but people make peace. It's minds and hearts. And this is as close to any concept of minds and hearts that I've ever come across. Yes?
Herb, what year did you photograph? Oh, is this all done at the same time or?
Well, the nuns were done, the black nuns were done last year. The white nuns were done about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And most 90%, 95% of the other ministers were done around 1995.
Well, it looks like you shot every picture with available light. Am I correct?
Some of the inner shots of the churches were flash, like the one that I said was on Buckeye with the huge white altar behind him. That was lit up with several different umbrellas because the place was just so damn dark. Most of them I tried for available light, but many of them required artificial lighting because they were indoors.
Very interesting.
Very.
So is it part of the book now, that collection?
Yes.
What is, where is that book available?
I don't know how to turn this on. Well, it's 30 years out of print.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure you could find one. I have it. It's the book is not called Cleveland Bicentennial. It's called something else. I'll look upstairs, and if you're interested, I'll check my book references. I'm
curious, yeah. I also wanted to know, so when you photographed them, was there any interview? Did they say anything regarding their religion, their views, or it was just you taking a portrait?
It was an hour conversation, and while we were taking pictures, there was no video, there was no audio, there was no records kept. I just had their last names and the addresses, and and believe me, I scoured my files for the model releases. to try to put names on each of these. Because I remember each of them and each of the locations, I just can't remember the names. What else? Anyone? So,
What equipment did you use, Herb?
all Hasselblad. All, at that time, it was Agfa film, all 100. All printed on RC, and then there was a final portfolio made on fiber prints, Agfa print, Agfa paper. But those were all Hasselblad. And I held myself to 2 rolls, 24 shots of each person.
Do you use any lighting?
Where it was necessary, yes. Mostly no, but where it was total black inside, I had to use big umbrellas with a big I forgot the name of the equipment, but a formal lighting box and umbrella.
Do you use a system to design the lighting and then you take a picture?
He carries everything.
Okay.
I set the camera up, take the picture, and a couple years later, when he and I went out, I did a project called the Artist Project, where I photographed 105 local artists that ran from literally Ashtabula to Oberlin to South, and then in Cleveland. I photographed 105 artists in 103 locations. And at that time, you could do a Polaroid. There was Polaroid filmmaking. So we published a book called The Artist Project. And in the back of the book, there are 100 portraits of Ryan, because I used him to set up the posing and the lighting on each of the different portraits that we did. So that was fun.
Cool.
Now, for this book, did you try to keep all the format the same for the consistency, and all the pictures were of the same size when you
Yes.
printed it?
Yes. There was an exhibition of about 25 or 30 of the actual prints, which were 11 on 11 by 14 paper, 10 by 10 prints. There were about,
Square?
yeah, all square, nothing cropped. All formats, all wide angle. Most of them were wide angle. Some of them were normal 80 millimeter. All black and white, all hand processed.
Very interesting.
Very.
Quite a project. You learn a lot. And in my career, I have photographed 9,000 black and white portraits. Individuals or groups have been before my camera. And you learn a little bit from everybody. You ask questions, you talk, and you tap into their lives while they are sharing their life with you. So every portrait represents a virtual slice of life, maybe a 30th of a second, but their time as to who they are and where they are in life as it's captured on film.
So was it through your conversations that you got a glimpse as to their character, their personality?
Definitely. You can't hide from a camera. And there were a couple who were not in this project, who were real sons of bitches. I mean, just obnoxious people. And then I got to one church, and I did this magnificent portrait of a black minister. And 2 days later, headline of Cleveland Plain Dealer, the minister so-and-so was dismissed for making anti-Semitic comments in public while wearing a police uniform
Oh,
as police chaplain. So he got axed. So for the most part, everyone, as I said, was
Here we go.
and marvelous and judicious and always willing to share. And it was an education for me because, as I said, I'm this guy from Shaker Heights, and to get out of my bailiwick, to get out into the environment, to really live and learn the city, this was one of the incredible ways to do it, because you mixed and melded with one of virtual everybody.
Right. But it just seems like you caught their character, you put, them in an environment that mimicked their character. And, that I think is what makes it special. But, without getting into some kind of a conversation or some kind of a discovery process, these are all fully formed people, they're not, just models where you can just say,
Right.
So, you must have an incredible banter with these people to be able to draw all that out.
Because I consider them collaborators. I never use the word model. I never use the word subject. I rarely use the word client. I always use the word collaborator, because unless it's in front of me, I can't put it on film. So it's my ability to engage them, as you so accurately described, on a one-to-one basis that will make them or encourage them to relax enough so that I can see the moment as it happens and then grab it. And that's the essence of my portraiture.
Beautiful.
Great.
I'm curious why none of the Muslim groups were willing to work with you. Is it because you're Jewish, or because just they didn't want anyone?
As I said, there was one other guy on the project who got into a mosque. He took 3 pictures and they asked him to leave. So I think it didn't have anything to do with the fact that I was Jewish.
No.
I think they just didn't want the publicity.
Okay.
Also,
I have 2 pages in the book, and across from me is a full-length page taken in a mosque. So it wasn't that we denigrated, them. It was their choice not to participate, because I would have taken the same time, care, and effort
Oh, yeah, I understand.
to do their imams and participate in their services.
Sure.
Yes? Any more? Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you.
This project, Herb, it's time, I'm sure it took a lot of time to do that, and you did a great
Yeah,
job of it,
very
so.
nice, Jeff. I think the black
Yeah.
and white, once again, is very effective.
Very much so.
Yeah, the
That's why-
portraits were amazing.
That's why I've always photographed in black and white, because of the power and because of the intensity and the emotion that the pictures contain.
This is always a good time to give Margaret a multiple choice exam right about now.
Oh, Larry, don't do that to me.
Okay, just checking. All right.
I've been up since 4 o'clock. I'm ready to go to bed. Thanks, Larry. Herb, it was great. It was really great.
Okay. All right. I will.
Herb, thank you, Herb.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Herb.
Thank you for
Thank you.
allowing me to present to you.
I got some penny.
Incredible work.
Wow.
Incredible.
Thank you. I gave you several options for events for January. I'm working, and whichever one clicks first is what we'll do.
Okay.
Great.
Keep
Thank you.
posted.
Great, thank you.
all.
Thank you, Happy Herb. holidays.
Thank you, Herb.
Thank you, Herb.
Bye.
Thank you much. I really appreciate your patience and your participation. Take care, guys. Have a good
Bye-bye.
one.
Happy holidays,
everybody.
Happy
Thanks.
holidays,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas, Happy
Absolutely.
Hanukkah.